Hey, all. Welcome to the Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and discuss some of humanity's most controversial and intriguing concepts through the lens of skepticism. We have with us today Richard Gilliver from Skeptic Takeout, Laura McGee from Unapologetically Me, and Richard Gill from the Yorkshire Atheist. Today, we are going to be discussing the flat earth theory. So, grab your English tea or your cold brew with light milk and just a tad of vanilla and join us as we discuss that strange exotic disc that we live on. This is episode 22, Flat Earth. Okay, so gentlemen, hello and welcome to the show today. How are you guys?
Hello. Hunky dory. It has been non-stop pissing it down for the last 48 hours.
Yes.
And I'm not enjoying that.
No. Oh, I'd be loving it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wants to try riding a motorcycle to work before he complains about that.
Yeah. Motorcycle in the rain is like the worst.
Yeah. I had shorts on as well, which didn't really go that well.
Oh man. Oh, well, it's been like up over 100 here, so I'm kind of jealous of you guys just a little bit. If we could just take your weather and my weather and just sort of meld them together, I think we might have a nice, decent, climate to work with. But anyway, speaking of climate and how much it revolves around the idea that we have around Earth,
that was a very loose connection.
It was very loose, but
I approve of it.
I gotta work my way into the topic somehow. So just roll with it. Today's topic is flat Earth, which should be really, really interesting. So let's start with what you guys know and or think about it.
I'll start because I know, from previous conversations, Gilliver says that he's got a bit more of an insight into that because you've done stuff on your own channel about this, haven't you, Gilliver? So I guess I'm much more the layman in this regard. But because up until sort of the last few years, really, and me being exposed to interesting people on the internet, the idea of a flat Earth to me was always just this idea humans had in the past about what the Earth was like, because they had no way of knowing that the Earth was spherical or mostly spherical. But yeah, it's a very vocal minority of people, an incredibly vocal minority of people in more recent years have seemingly become convinced of the Earth being flat and it all being some grand conspiracy, and it baffles me. And I can get my head around, we've talked about conspiracy theories before and stuff, and I can get my head around lots of them, but I can't get my head around flat Earth. It doesn't sink in. It doesn't compute.
So what's interesting when you say like a small but vocal group, like they even have a documentary. I think it's on Netflix. Don't quote me just in case it's like Hulu
I've seen the documentary on Netflix.
It's so can you imagine the reach that this theory now has with things like Netflix and YouTube and stuff at just anyone's reach to just create a documentary and throw it up there?
Yeah. And I like how Richard said he couldn't get his head around the flat Earth.
Very funny.
I think that the mentioning YouTube's really interesting because there was a study by, I think she was called Ashley something or other. I can't remember her surname. And she did a study which basically found that YouTube was Ashley Landrum, who she found that YouTube was kind of instrumental. She'd interviewed a lot of people at this Flat Earth convention about what they believed and why. Mm-hmm. And she found that YouTube was kind of instrumental to a lot of the people who she interviewed about actually informing them about flat Earth. And these were people who believed in it. So this was kind of back a few years ago. And now YouTube's kind of taken steps to address that. And now, as this episode will probably have when it appears on YouTube, amongst the many other platforms we appear on. But if you watch this episode on YouTube, you'll probably get a little disclaimer underneath telling you about that the flat Earth theory is like
that it's not
nonsense.
It's not a proven theory.
Yeah, and the YouTube are taking steps to address the fact that they know that they were kind of instrumental in giving it a platform when it didn't have one. I think
obviously with Google being in on the grand conspiracy to cover this all up.
Well, I do like that YouTube is doing that though, like taking at least some responsibility for the idea of spreading different ideas and beliefs just by the very nature of its platform.
Like COVID and stuff, don't they? Like they put warnings on like COVID related things to make sure that people are aware of. You can go to this place and this place to get genuine guidance and information.
Yeah, and other social media did the same thing, putting the disclaimers up like, hey, this hasn't been scrutinized or whatever, so that people have to like at least understand that it may or may not be true.
Yeah, it's a good job we're not monetized mentioning COVID and flat Earth in one episode.
Oh, geez, that would be the end of our illustrious podcast career right there, right? But that
yes. Go on.
That reminds me of what you guys were saying with it being so instrumental, like with YouTube being so instrumental. One of the gentlemen I work with in the military, he's a chaplain assistant actually, and very, very has a lot of other beliefs that I don't necessarily agree with. Very, very hardcore Christian. However, he's also very educated and curious and skeptical and does ask a lot of questions. And one thing he was telling me was about the flat Earth communities on Facebook. And so he likes to look into them just like, hey, what are these people saying? What is it that they believe? And to hear his perspective on just how big the communities are growing and how vocal they are and how they will, like, they'll really, what do you call it? They, where like if you disagree with them on their website, they'll kick you off. Like, yeah. So just how, yeah. I'm drawing a blank right now, but yeah, like you can't get in there and debate. You can't get in there and disagree with them. It's kind of like sort of an echo chamber for people with these beliefs, but they do draw in new people who are asking these questions, and it's another avenue for giving them all this information. And it's really interesting the way that he talks about these groups and how they're growing.
I think this conversation should really begin with kind of you, Laura, because you said you did some kind of looking into the flat Earth when you came across it, and I gave it a little bit of credence to start with. Is that right?
Yeah. So it was actually like just at the end of being Muslim. I was still technically considering myself a Muslim, but I was sort of on my way out. I was watching tons and tons of YouTube videos on just lots of different topics, and sort of like stretching my knowledge base and my what do you call it, challenging my beliefs in a way, and not deliberately so. Like I was watching these videos to try and learn more and to try and confirm my beliefs. But what ended up happening was that I just heard a lot of different perspectives, and it kind of got me thinking. One of them was the flat Earth, and for half a second, like listening to this video, I was like, this guy sounds really legit. What if it were true? Like, could I imagine myself in a world where we're told that the Earth is round, but it is indeed actually flat? And so I allowed myself that sort of like mental space while I was listening to him to imagine what that would be like. And it really did sound like his argument sounded really legitimate. But all that made me do really was like watch more videos, like pro con debates, like what's the information. And it became very apparent very early on that it was a bunch of bullshit. Like the science is really, really bad.
Can you remember what some of the main sorts of points were that sounded convincing to you in terms of like the rationale for believing that?
Yeah, so their talking points scientifically are not half bad the way that they're organized. Now, the conspiracy side of it is just obviously a bunch of baloney, like the whole, all of NASA, all of the governments, this huge, vast conspiracy trying to convince us that the Earth is round for whatever reason. Like that is the part I can't really comprehend, like what benefit it would serve so many people to have such a huge cover up and such a huge conspiracy. It really makes
have an answer to that
sense. Oh, okay.
Carry on, and I'll come back to that shortly.
Okay, so we'll come back to that. But the science stuff, they use a lot of stuff like they talk about like flight paths, right? And how you can't actually circumnavigate the world, and they discuss what the flight paths actually look like. They talk about the rotation of the sun and how their model actually explains the rotation of the sun better. And it doesn't, by the way, when you actually look into it. But just hearing these arguments on their surface, stuff about like the escape velocity of the, like, you can't really get out of our atmosphere. It is true that it is very difficult to escape our gravity, but that's why we have massive rocket ships, right?
Yeah,
With
the
those,
entire government program.
I mean,
Massive.
yeah,
Thing,
massive. We
yeah.
are not talking about little helicopters or like little, like little jets just leaving the atmosphere. We are talking about massive craft with a lot of power, and that's required to get out of the atmosphere. So they
Is the
kind
whole
of
thing about flight paths the thing, because like when you look at it on a flat 2D map, which is a sort of warped projection of a 3D globe that it doesn't match up with, is that the sort of thing where like when you go from one place to another place that are supposedly in a straight line, but the flight path goes curved because actually a flat map doesn't represent a round globe, so it looks curved? Is that
like
the sort
the
of
Mercator, the projector map idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of. It's more like, it's way more simple than that, actually. And it sounds even a little bit more convincing. It's just like, if you look on flights, if you go try to book a flight, there's no way to book a flight like this way around the world, or one that crosses the Antarctic. And I don't know why we'd want to book a flight that crosses the Antarctic. It doesn't make any sense to me. It seems to me like we would avoid it just kind of naturally. But yeah, they talk a lot about how, which could, because that would be the wall, right? That is along the outside of the disk. So we see it as a tiny dot in the south of the globe, and they're saying no, it's actually this wall, and you can't fly over it. But actually, if you look, there are people who have traversed it, like all the way across it. And there's a lot of like recorded data out there about Antarctica. So you can, I mean, you have to dismiss a lot of information, but that's what it is like there's no flights that go across it, and there's no flights that go entirely around the world.
Just thinking about the geography of the Earth as a globe, I can't think of any benefit of flying over Antarctica. Like, because the places where you would fly to, I guess, in the southern hemisphere are mostly quite far north of that, and like we all live in the northern hemisphere. Do you know what I mean? Like there's
Right.
a lot of sea down there.
Well, and then the interesting thing with that is that, like, I guess, and I'm not the biggest expert. Like, these were videos that I watched years ago, but I guess what it is, like, if you have this as the globe, and like you have the continent here and then the other continent there, that to just fly under and go straight would have been the shorter, like as the crow flies, is that how it goes? Like, would be shorter, right? But instead we do this thing where we hop around to get from the bottom of South America to the bottom of Africa or whatever. We kind of do this like around the world sort of thing. And their argument is because, well, actually, if you look at our map, it makes more sense because it's a direct line. And then on the globe, it would have made more sense to go over Antarctica, or I'm probably screwing the whole argument up, to be honest. But that's the whole idea. And like, if you think about it commercially, and you think about it in terms of what airplanes can actually handle in terms of flight time over an ocean, right? Our flight paths kind of make a lot of sense. And you can fly over some of these spots they say you can't fly over. And I think it was RN Raw actually on what is that channel? The Non Sequiturs. He had a debate with a flat earther, and he on live on the debate got on his computer and he found flight paths that were exactly the ones that they said don't exist. So very interesting. But when you're first hearing that kind of stuff, if that's the only video you're watching, it's pretty compelling. Like, really?
Yeah. Gilliver, you said you had a response to the thing of like, what is the reason?
Yeah, I did. Just briefly, before I mentioned that, I was kind of fascinated how Laura, who works for the US Air Force, was having trouble with the term "how the crow flies."
As the crow flies, I know, right?
I like it how I fucked it up when I was taking the piss out of you as well.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it was a documentary filmmaker called Rob Skiba, I think that was his name, who said the primary reason for people kind of building this conspiracy thing up around the flat Earth was because they thought that the government was trying to hide God from people. That is the primary reason given for most people who believe that there's a cover-up. Now, I was thinking about this earlier when I was thinking about this episode, and that doesn't make any sense to me. Because if you think about the US, they've got a space agency. They're heavily influenced by religion. They wouldn't want to keep God out of things.
Oh, right.
Then, so who else has got an India space? India has got a big space agency. They're very, very religious. They wouldn't want to keep.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of partnership work with kind of satellites and stuff being designed in Britain. Britain's church and state is combined. They wouldn't want to keep God out of things. So where is this coming from? This I found it really puzzling.
Space Agency, which is made up of member states of predominantly Catholic countries and all of that.
Right.
It just doesn't seem to make. There just seems to be no rhyme, no reason as to why they'd be wanting to keep God out of things.
Let's imagine that is the reason, though, in terms of the trying to keep God out of things or whatever else. Like, how would fooling the world into thinking the Earth is a globe achieve that end?
I know. How does that create atheists just left and right? Like.
Well, I don't know about Laura's question, but Richard's question I think you can trace, if you look back at the modern flat Earth movement, it was kind of all the proponents of it were religious. The two kind of first big proponents of it, who were one was influenced by the other, but I don't know if they were actually connected in any way other than that. But the two main proponents of it were both very religious, and the first one kind of came up. I don't know if he came up with it, but it was a proponent of something called the Zetetic philosophy, which was basically it was really against the scientific method. They thought it was corrupting, and the Zetetic philosophy basically it's. I don't want to be disparative to anybody, so I'm not going to go down the route I was going to go on.
As a skeptic, you can. Yeah, I was about to say you can be critical of it.
It's if something appears a certain way, then it is a certain way. So because the Earth appears flat, it is flat. That's essentially what Zetetic philosophy is. And the guy who came up with that was really against the scientific method and all its testing and things like that.
So that's
by extension of the Earth being like I said, like almost spherical, that goes with also the explanations in terms of how the Earth was created in terms of as an after effect of the creation of the sun billions of years ago, and which was a thing, like, can you go back to Big Bang cosmology and all of that lot, and the Earth how it is a direct consequence of Big Bang cosmology being true. And so I guess I can understand people wanting to react against that by, I don't know, just saying no to the whole thing rather than just trying to.
I
don't know whether this is the case or not, but I would suggest that it was also, if it was against the scientific method, a lot of the people in the scientific method at that time, coming out of the Enlightenment, were kind of people, were scientists, and a lot of them were kind of questioning God, if maybe not dismissing.
A lot of them were actually religious, though. Like, I mean, they use science to try and confirm that God exists, or to try to show God's creation. Well, it backfired.
And I think that's and same with a lot of the early archaeologists. A lot of early archaeological expeditions were kind of put out there to go and try and prove the Bible, and they were just, the evidence just wasn't there that they expected to find. And maybe that was a reaction to that. Certainly the second person in the kind of chain in the modern flat Earth movement, who was, I think she was called Lady Elizabeth Blount, and she was very kind of anti science and stuff, and she was very hardcore Christian, and she even criticized the church, some of the churches, and said they were involved in a cover-up because they wouldn't publish her pamphlets about the flat Earth. And this was the church itself. So from the very beginning of the modern flat Earth movement, there's been kind of this idea of a cover-up to try and stop the truth being out there.
Well, and that's not that unusual, is it? That, like, when you have a really fundamental belief that the mainstream, whatever the religion is, doesn't necessarily agree with, that you have this sort of inner, like an inner war where it's like, well, you're part of the conspiracy, or you're trying to cover things up, or you're corrupting the faith. You're not really, like I guess it's like the no true Scotsman fallacy, right? Where it's like, you guys aren't real Christians. But what's interesting to me is going back to what you guys were saying about like the scientific method and stuff. There was two things that caught my attention. One was that zetetic method. So how easy is it to just prove through very, very simple observation, not even through like intense scientific scrutiny, that sometimes things appear to be like what they're not, right? Like there's just so many instances where our brains fool us, or where we can show and demonstrate very simply that things aren't the way that they appear to be. And so that to me, like it's already suspect, because it's already like, well, it's just in this one case and we're going to really focus on this one topic, and we're not going to expand it to all the rest of reality, or we're not going to expand it to all of our observations, only the ones that fit our agenda, right? Yeah. And then the second thing is, like, at least in terms of the modern flat earth movement, they rely heavily on the concept of the scientific, oh my goodness, I just lost it. Yeah, oh my god, why did that word just leave me? Yeah, they rely really, really heavily on the scientific method. Now, it's bad science, and even in the documentary, like, they show the guy doing the experiment, and the experiment fails for flat earth and it supports a round earth, and his response was like, oh, well, that's interesting, right? And then he goes on continuing to believe flat earth. But that's just something interesting that I was wondering, like, what do you guys think about that? The idea that on the one hand, they're saying science is a bunch of BS, a bunch of conspiracies, don't believe them, but here's all these scientific reasons why you should believe what we're saying.
I think you get that quite... Sorry, Richard, go on.
I was going to say, I think it's to the point where even people like that, if you physically took them into a rocket and, you know, went up into space to have a look at the Earth as a globe spinning there, flying through space, orbiting the sun, that they'd still find reasons to disbelieve it. Like it would be, there'd be screens on the windows which are actually showing a different image, or it's a projection, or so, you know, like there'd always be
hallucinogens or whatever.
Why the evidence that's smack bang in their face isn't legitimate or isn't, you know, trustworthy.
It's kind of interesting that you say that, because I used to joke around and say, like, the first people that they should put in space commercially should be like the leaders of the flat earth movement, right? Yeah. Just give them a free ticket and like just put it all to rest.
To be fair to flat earthers, and I don't think it's just them who do this, who kind of use science when they're against the science.
Right.
Because I've had lots of conversations with kind of theists over the years who will say that, you know, science is a bad thing and science is this and science is that and the other, and they're communicating over the internet while they're doing it. So, you know what I mean? It's take it when it works for you and reject it when it's kind of contradicts what you say, I think is the kind of philosophy they tend to go with.
Like the confirmation bias route. Yeah. Well, that brings up a really interesting subtopic with the whole flat earth thing, and it does definitely apply to more topics than just flat earth. In fact, there's many topics, including creationism, which we talked about last week, with the idea that that why am I losing things so bad today? I'm gonna do a lot of cutting. That's not gonna get cut. It's gonna end up in there.
It's just gonna end up in there like it always does. I did put a post on our Facebook discussion.
I know, how many times did Laura say she's going to cut it and it doesn't get cut, right?
Just never happens.
No, but I was talking about the confirmation bias thing, right? So how often does it happen where for whatever reason that people are so attached to whatever it is they believe in, that they will form these other sub beliefs that are really complex, really complicated, have these really elegant arguments. And I know from a skeptical perspective, the flat earth argument isn't elegant, but I'm telling you, like, if you don't look into it, you just listen to what they're saying, it sounds really legit, and it sounds very reasonable and very like well put together. So it's interesting to me that it's more important to hold on to a belief and then to build this whole worldview around it than to just look at the world itself and then build your beliefs to fit what you see.
Yeah, I think that's the core of a lot of conspiracy thinking, though, isn't it? That kind of closed belief system we've talked about. We don't need to go into that. If you want to find out about that, go and watch our episode on conspiracy theories.
Yes.
But that's I think that is it's interesting, because I was going slightly off topic, but along the same lines. I was talking to a guy today about intermittent fasting. He asked me what I thought about it, because before I got COVID last year, I was kind of really into health and fitness and stuff like that. And it was just asking my opinion on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, well, from what I've read, the studies I've read, I think it seems quite legitimate. It's quite good. I says, what have you looked at?
Negative.
Yeah, I says, what have you looked at? What sources have you looked at? I says, oh, I've watched loads of YouTube videos on it.
Right,
because
those are reliable.
I kind of, they're not particularly reliable. What else is it when he says, well, everybody I've seen talking about it says it's good, and I'm like, man, your thinking is so poor. YouTube isn't a good source. It does not saying there aren't good people on YouTube who've got professional credentials,
like that Skeptic Hangout place.
But yeah, just because they're on YouTube, it doesn't mean they're a good source. And just because lots of people believe something, it doesn't mean it's true. Now it happens,
right?
As it happens, I think he was going along the right lines with it, but his methodology, that word, for finding out how it was true was terrible. And I think this is the problem with a lot of people who do get kind of sucked into this. It's not because they're gullible or stupid or anything like that. It's just that they don't have the right tools for assessing how to look at things.
And I think especially nowadays with things being communicated online so effortlessly, and even like someone with sort of even half a brain cell's worth of technical knowledge can put together something that looks half decent on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Can list things like you were saying in the videos you watch, Laura, because they've got this list of scientific sounding arguments or proofs of this and things like that. I think I can completely understand why people would get sucked into that, and especially with the whole thing about like echo chambers as well. You get into that Facebook group or those people you follow on Twitter or that YouTuber that you watch all the time, and that's what you're hearing all the time. And obviously we talked about this in the conspiracies episode and a bit in the sort of pseudoscience episode as well. But yeah, I think it's really easy to just dismiss flat earthers as crazy stupid people, but
you're right,
because they're just deep into it.
Yeah, and because you're right, like people don't really have the opportunity to look a whole lot deeper. And I can't even tell you how many times, like throughout my whole life, and I try not to do it now, but I'm sure that there's ways in which I do, where it's like something that is explained to you doesn't quite fit, or you don't quite believe it, right? Like anything. And then like for me, for example, it was a lot about spirituality and religion. Like, well, this doesn't quite jive, so let me reflect on it and see what I think about it. And then you come up with something that makes so much sense to you that it clicks, right? And it's like, okay, this has got to be the truth, because when I think about it, I can't find any error in it. And it's so perfect and it works.
And it's one of those where we know that sort of thinking is like incorrect, like because it makes sense to be true, but still it makes sense to you, doesn't it? Like you can know that's not a good way of thinking, but we can still think like that really easily.
Yeah, and how often do we just like, oh, well, I can't really explain it to you, or oh, you just don't understand, but really, no, this is true, right? I think we do that quite often and naturally as humans. I think most especially when we're young, but I think that we do still continue to do that into adulthood.
Yeah, and we're so susceptible when we're young. I'm not having very much luck with my words today. We're so susceptible.
Yeah.
When we're young, with that Laura just said, to kind of anything that people tell us, and that for the first few years of our lives, it's our world and how we assess things. We assess things because people we trust tell us those things. So it's not
the education system, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
as children, teachers tell us this is a thing that is true.
Mm-hmm.
And that's knowledge. Like, I'm giving you the knowledge of the world.
But it's not just good things. It's like our parents, when we're young as well, tell us about Santa Claus, about the Easter Bunny, about the Tooth Fairy. So we're getting bombarded with this crap information. And there's no wonder. Yeah, and there's no wonder people grow up kind of accepting bad stuff without really questioning it, because from like immediately when we're younger, we're given all that stuff. It's the norm.
So that makes me kind of reflect on the whole skepticism thing. And I kind of wonder how often even the three of us, or even the most skeptic person, how much do we take just at face value? Like, just someone says that, oh, A equals B, or this is a fact, or this is true, and we just kind of accept it because it either doesn't directly affect us, or it's not something that we find particularly suspect, right? So, like, one thing that I like doing with the kids is like those like YouTube videos that are like, did you know, right? Like the that debunk like common myths, and the common myths are so like mundane, and I wish I could think of one off the top of my head, and I just can't. But all these mundane things that we just believe because we've heard them, or we just believe because they sound good. So here we are talking about flat earthers and how it's like, well, the argument sounds good, but really it's like a bunch of crap.
Like, here's
And
the thing. So, like, people say if you swallow chewing gum, it stays in your gut for like
like
7
that.
years.
Yeah, there you
That's the thing,
So
that
let's talk.
doesn't affect any of our lives, but like, it's just literally untrue. But we all kind of, sort of, I guess, think that.
go. Right.
We're getting towards a commercial break, but when we come back on those points you both just made, let's talk about how we assess things and what we could consider something that is reasonable to believe with little evidence. We'll talk about that after the commercial break.
Awesome.
Right. So I don't have anything coming up. And I've just done 2 fantastic shows with Ethan and Michael.
Oh, how did they go?
You know what? They were brilliant. And we talked about the flat earth on one of them as well. We had a caller, but we'll talk about that in the second half of the show. So have any of you two got anything coming up?
No, I've just come out of self-isolation from COVID, so not myself, but I'm gonna go outside. And
what else could you do, Richard, with all this free time you've got after being isolated?
Outside, sometimes what I like to do is to whip out my Google Pixel 5, other brands of phone are available, and go on to the Facebook app. And on there, hang on, at the top, there's just this little button that's for groups. And my top pinned group, as it should be all of yours, is Skeptic Hangout official discussion group. And it's a wonderful place with a growing number of members, which is wonderful, where we can discuss all things to do with this brilliant show we are all on, and the topics that we talk about. I think everybody should go and join it because it's a nice little growing community, and it's a good place to sort of just say things in a safe space. I like it. And you can find that and all of our other platforms, other than the one you're currently consuming this program on, at linktr.ee/skeptic hangout.
Richard Gilliver, you had said you wanted to talk about something when we get back. So
yeah, I was interested in what you brought up about how we assess things and in general as skeptics, and how we can fall for things ourselves and just believe things.
Sorry, I was interrupting you. I was just going to say on that, because things like the flat earth movement, I think it's really easy to just think that's ridiculous, but then it does cause you to also think, doesn't it? Like, how do I know that is ridiculous, and how do I know that the earth is round? Like, how do I know that we actually do live on a globe? And I guess obviously we've all been taught at school that we live on a globe, and we've been taught the heliocentric model of the solar system, like the earth goes around the sun, and the fact that we're in a galaxy and whatever else. We've seen videos online of the planet being a globe and of rocket launches and all of this lot. But it does raise those questions of, like, how do I know this, and am I just trusting other people on this, or I don't know. You can ask yourself that question, can't you?
Yeah, so that's kind of exactly what I was getting at when I said, like, it made me question, like, that. Not so much like, oh my God, this must be true. It was more exactly what you're saying. It was like, what if we were on a flat earth, and how do I know that the earth is round, and how do I know what it is that I know? Right. And so you're right.
Gilliver, you've said before, like, how lots of things to do with science, it's like we're not just, in a way, in the instant, we are trusting people who have tested it and whatever else, but we are also in the position where if we wanted to, we could go out and test those things ourselves,
of course,
confirm them and stuff. But actually, I don't suppose many people do those things specifically to confirm.
But what is the reason why we don't do it? And I think this comes. I was very lucky when I was at school, probably kind of, I don't know, 7 or 8ish. I was exposed quite early to the fact that science changes, because it was about that time. I don't remember which dinosaur it was, but you're 7, you're 8, you're like into your dinosaurs and things, and they just said, I think it was the Diplodocus was no longer considered a dinosaur. That it had kind of been, the idea about it had changed, and I was exposed to that at a very early age, and it led me, that like was brilliant for me, because from a very young age it let me know that science isn't a static thing that should be believed as a thing. And it kind of kickstarted this kind of idea, this like looking at stuff and in a fluid way rather than a static way, and like assessing things rather than just believing things because you were told it. And I think that's, I think that's the kind of thing that set me off on this whole kind of journey to begin with from that early age. But I think just assessing things, if I told you that I've got a new puppy, there's no reason for you to doubt me, because we know puppies are things. People put pictures of puppies on Facebook all the time, and if I told you I've got a new unicorn, then you're going to want to see evidence for that, because it's much less believable, because we know that as far as we know, unicorns are only in fantasy stories. And why am I making that claim?
And that brings up a super interesting point of like why it is that some things we just reject offhand and other things we at least have to think about before rejecting, right? Like, given that the majority of the world is religious, you tell pretty much anybody in the world, like, I have a pet unicorn, and they're not even gonna say, well, prove it or show it to me. They're gonna think that you're full of shit. Or they're gonna think that you're joking or lying, or like, oh, he's just being funny or sarcastic. But they're not for 1 second gonna be like, really? You do? Can I see it? Right? But you start telling people certain spiritual things, or start challenging their beliefs in ways that create these conspiracy theories, and suddenly it's not so easy to just dismiss it. But maybe from like our perspective, like when I hear the flat earth, it's a lot easier for me to just be like, yeah, that's a bunch of BS. I'll look into it still, I'll come up with the arguments, but instantly my brain might be a little bit more skeptical. But for a lot of people, especially the religious people who it fits into their worldview, it's a lot easier to accept than to just reject offhand. So it's pretty interesting the way that works.
I guess as well, because the majority of people are not flat earth believing people. There's that whole thing of, in the same way as like evangelical Christians at the moment are feeling like they've got this sort of persecution narrative going on, which strengthens that belief.
Yeah.
Like, flat earthers, I guess, also kind of have that thing as well, like they're in this position, and because they're sort of battling against prejudice and discrimination and persecution from their point of view, I guess, all the time, that's another reason to sort of rally around it and push back in lots of ways.
Yes.
I don't have anything on that.
Yeah, we agree.
Yeah.
I think one of the, you see in flat earthers, there was one in particular who actually went to a school and started shouting at the kids, telling them that they'd been lied to. Mm-hmm. And I think this, going back to the education kind of thing and why we believe things, we're told that the earth is round at school, and as we get older, we do ever more complex kind of science and math classes that kind of reinforce that. But that's taught alongside kind of maths and stuff, and English and stuff that's demonstrably true. We can see from a very early age that 1 + 1 is 2. And we're taught this by the same institutions teaching us that say the earth is round. So we have from this kind of whole kind of built up thing from very early on about trusting these institutions and what they're telling us. Yeah. And, where we can see, it's strange because in one way, there's nothing. It's right to think that just because they're telling us one thing, this other thing is probably true that they're telling us as well.
Right.
But in another way, it's also a fallacy that just because they're telling us one thing,
and it can be a
this
harmful
means
one.
the other thing is true.
Yeah, it could be a harmful fallacy, like the histories that we learn, like that promote nationalism or that promote a certain view of history. Not just nationalism, but like to look at more like one religion more favorably than another. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I was taught a very, very pro-Christian, anti-Muslim history of the world. And then when I actually look into it, it's very much more neutral, and like both parties had their part to play, and certainly both parties collided and clashed. But the history that you find when you take a broader look is so different than what we're taught in public schools, regardless of your country, right? So in a way that sort of yeah, we do take it for granted in terms of science, but we all, and maybe that's wrong. Even though the science is correct, like still looking into it and understanding it is important, but we do that in other ways too. And I think most notably with history.
Yeah, I think history is an awkward one anyway, because it's quite hard it's quite an hard area to study, and there's different methods of studying it, and you've got to collate that information. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think science, you start off at a basic level, and then as you go through your schooling, you kind of advance, so it's a steady process. It's not just a case of, well, you believe bad science, as the flat earthers would, you're being lied to, because you can see the process build up as you get older, and you can, if you choose to, and if you're so inclined to, go and specialize in these subjects and learn for yourself about all these things that the kind of religious people are, and I'm not picking just on flat earthers here, I'm gonna just have a go at all religious people who kind of say, well, evolution's wrong, and certain kind of physics is wrong because it don't fit our worldview. And yet you can, as you've gone through the school system, build up that thing and then go off to specialize in it. So I think that is a major difference between. Sorry, Richard, go on.
No, I was interrupting you. Sorry. I was just going to say, because I teach space as part of the curriculum that I teach with my class, and part of what I do with that is talk about the history of our understanding of the world and the universe and stuff, going back.
I like that.
And so part of that is that we go outside and just talk about what we can see, in terms of what would people without any technology have understood about how the world works and stuff. Mm-hmm. So you see the sun traveling through the sky, and you see the moon appear at night and the stars appear at night, and you can tell that the stars move in the sky at night, and how therefore a geocentric model of the universe with the Earth at the center and everything traveling around it makes sense without any use of technology or any sort of research like that. But then we talk about people who started looking at the universe through the lens of a telescope, or by certain other once we then had satellites and other technological advancements, and how all of those sorts of things added to our understanding of how things work. So yeah, we saw that stars moved through the sky, but actually we understand that they look like they move through the sky because the Earth is rotating and is traveling through space. And all of those sorts of things, it does make sense, doesn't it, in terms of in history, people not having technology to see all this stuff. But when we do have such amazing, mind-blowing, awe-inspiring technology in order to explain these things in their full magnificence and glory, like the understanding of the Earth, like flying through space at thousands of miles an hour as it's flying around the sun, which is also whizzing around the galaxy at however many thousands of miles an hour, while it feels like we're still, and all the stars around, which are burning balls of gas, and the light that comes from those stars is from like thousands and tens and thousands of years in the past, because it takes that long for the light to travel through space. All of that sort of thing, to me, is not only like full of evidence, because we've got evidence to show that all of those things are true, but it's also much more magnificent an explanation of what's going on than like a really simplified sort of basic structure of like a flat Earth with a dome around
with a mobile thing above it. Yeah.
like I am full of awe and wonder when I think about my understanding of the universe as it stands, that's backed up by scientific, theories and advancements and stuff. And I don't know why some people are not excited by all of that.
Oh, it is absolutely freaking awe-inspiring and like ridiculously huge to comprehend, and perhaps even more so than a god. I think you're right,
And
but
I think you've just hit on something very important there, though, when you said it's difficult to comprehend.
Mhm.
And I think because I've heard flat earthers say before that, how can you believe you're on this spinning ball and not falling off and chasing the sun at so many miles? And I think that's it. I think in a lot of cases they just cannot comprehend it.
But
It's
then
too big an idea for them to.
really simple ideas, like when we're on the side road on the way to the motorway. So when we're going up to the motorway, we're driving at 30, but we're then speeding up to go up to 70 miles an hour on the motorway. You push back in your seat because you can feel that acceleration. But when you're on the motorway traveling at 70, you don't
you
feel
don't
any
feel it anymore.
It feels the same as when you're traveling at 30. And it's not that many. It's not like that information is hidden. I know it doesn't feel intuitive. It doesn't feel like we're on a rock that's just got this tiny little protective bubble of air around us that's
Teeny
flying
tiny
through
little.
space. It doesn't feel like that. But it's not hard to find out that that's actually the truth. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not.
Yeah, but so you both bring up a really good point though about that. Like there, so you talk about science and how you can start very, very simple and you can build on it and build on it and build on it and get more complex, and that anybody, if they really, really want to, can look into this stuff. But there is kind of this point where people like either can't or won't or don't have the time to just take anymore, right? There's a point where you kind of cap off at your level of understanding.
Yeah.
And I know for a long time for me, I just didn't understand concepts like evolution, not because I rejected it or didn't agree with it, but because I just didn't have the time, space, energy, motivation to look deeper into it. It just wasn't part of my life. Like I had other things I needed to do. And so I wonder, like you guys talk about like, well, I don't wonder, this is more of a statement that I'm making. You talk about, well, the cool thing about science is that literally anybody can test it. Anyone can look into it. Anyone can learn the math that goes into it. But the harsh reality is that the vast majority of us just aren't going to. And so these arguments, they make so much sense to a person who's confused. And as soon as you have a question answered in a way that's like sufficient for you, it's very satisfying and it brings you like a lot of peace of mind. And so it kind of makes sense that a lot of these really bad explanations for things like the flat earth, like it kind of makes a sick kind of sense that people find it so intriguing.
Because we've talked before, haven't we, about how people not knowing things is an uncomfortable position to be in, and
Right.
how we have all come to know that I don't know is a really valid answer to a question, whereas people want to know. And that's why people do believe religious ideas about the creation of the world, obviously, like we talked about last week, or things like the flat earth, because they've got an answer that makes sense. That's fine, ticked off, move on with their lives. But often you find that especially the people that I've seen, seem to have actually dedicated time and efforts into advancing their knowledge of flat earthness when
Right.
actually they could have, gone in the other direction, actually found out scientific studies and whatever else. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Well, so let's talk a little bit because I know I think you've both touched upon it actually, but well, let's talk about the shape of and the makeup of what they actually consider the Earth to be. Because when I was on Ethan's show on the Perspective, hosting the Perspective of the day, we had a caller who called in, and he was a flat earther, and he was talking about this big ice wall that goes around the outside of the disc, and that's part of the kind of reason why nobody's been there, because we simply can't get over this ice wall. So
And
what
the firmament and stuff like that.
yeah,
Like,
what do you both understand about the shape of the Earth compared as according to the flat earthers?
so this is actually because we only have about 5 more minutes left in the episode before we get on to the next one. But this is a great one to end it on because I think it's really fascinating. So I've seen maps that were created by flat earthers that show the continents, and then they do just like a projection map, how it kind of skews the continents a little bit. This one certainly does the same thing. But from my understanding, it's almost like a disc, like it's almost like a coin. right? With like a bubble on top of it, from what I understand. And you have like the ice wall that you can't penetrate, but you also have this like dome over the top that you can't penetrate. And I've heard,
Like in the Simpsons movie.
yeah, and I've heard like different explanations for where the sun and the stars all fit in, whether they're lights inside the firmament or they exist outside of the firmament. I've heard people who believe that the Earth is flat, but that actually Jupiter and Neptune and all the other planets are round. Like, because you can actually observe that with your own eyes with a telescope. You can observe them being round. So that's kind of their way of getting around that sad truth. But yeah, like that to me is very basic. Does that make any sense? Gil, what's your understanding of
snow globe Earth?
Like a snow globe? That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I've seen sort of models of like it being like you've said, like a coin with the dome on the top, and then like the sun and the moon sort of hovering over the top, going round, and that explains the day and the night cycle and stuff. So like the sun's just shining on this bit and it moves around, and what have you. But I don't know if there's a consensus of like what the dome is made of, or why people can't get over this ice wall when we've got machines that can do lots of things that like go high in the sky and stuff. Is there a reason why we can't get over the ice wall?
Is there a reason we can't get through it? We've tunneled.
We've drilled miles
channels.
and miles under the earth. Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm not sure about the consistency of the accounts that they have either. And one thing that one of the models I've seen it, which made no sense to me, was that we kind of had this coin, as Laura described it, with the snow dome on top. But then they're telling us that there's and the ice walls surrounding it. But then they're telling us that there's land beyond the ice walls as well,
which is being hidden from us.
And apparently outside the snow globe, according to some models. So it's just all very confusing. It's kind of, I don't think, I'm not sure, I might be wrong. Please correct me, anybody in either you two or people in the Facebook group, correct me if I'm wrong, but is there just one kind of universal accepted flat Earth map? Or are there many different ones?
There's many different ones. Yeah. So I actually frequent a pizza place called Flat Earth Pizza. Google it, guys. The owner is a flat Earth proponent, and he literally legitimately believes it. And he has maps up on the wall, but he has multiple different flat Earth maps on the wall. And if you look closely, some of them contradict each other, but they're all valid flat Earth. I'm doing that with air quotes for those of you on the audio. Flat Earth maps.
He doesn't find that to be an issue.
He doesn't. Yeah. No. I mean, to my understanding, no. Yeah.
Well, no, showing them off in his
because the argument would then be, well, you guys have different versions of your globe maps, right? We have different types of projections and different ways of displaying. Like there's multiple different kinds of maps, right? So that would be the simple explanation, as inelegant and oversimplified as it is. But so we are coming up to the end of the episode, and that's right when we're getting to the juicy stuff, which is what the flat earthers actually believe. So I'm wondering if we need to do a take 2 on this episode.
You literally took the words out of my mouth.
Maybe even see if we can get a flat earther on to talk to, or somebody who knows a little bit more about it. Because that would be really fascinating to actually work with some of these claims versus what we've kind of heard on a documentary years ago, or what we've heard some guy say. It'd be really cool to sort of take some of these claims on, like head on.
Yeah.
And play with them. So yeah. So do you guys have any closing comments before we call it for today?
No.
I love it.
I definitely think we should continue this. I think there are lots of avenues we could go down. We've had a brief overview like we do on many of our episodes about subjects, and I think we need to revisit some of them, but this one especially, there's so much we could go down.
We were just getting into the meat of it.
Yeah.
So I would say this is going to be posted up on Facebook. So all y'all that follow our Facebook page, put your suggestions in for things to talk about, for resources to bring up or look into. That way, if we do an episode 2 on this, we can have some real meat to discuss. But in the meantime, we are Laura,
Richard,
and this has been Skeptic Hangout. Until next time,
keep questioning,
interrogate your beliefs,
and stay skeptical.
Bye all.
Bye. See you later.